Hey, what's up, everyone? Good evening. Welcome to this new live where we are going to talk about iOS app architecture and best practices to basically put together an app architecture that scales. So, for this live, first, as you've seen on the thumbnail and as you can see on the video feed, this live has been sponsored by Bitrise. So, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this live and, of course, the preparation of all the content I'm going to show you. So before we start, let's talk a little bit about what we are going to see during this live. So what we're gonna do is that I'm going to first show you a small app I've built, and I've built it in a way where we could see like the focus was not on the architecture at all. Basically, all of the code is inside the view controllers, and so we are going to go step by step over this app in order to refactor it to improve its architecture up to the point where it will be in a state where we could say it has become a scalable and proper iOS app architecture. So what are we going to see for that? So what is the outline for this live? So first I'm going to walk you through this app to see what it does, and then we are going to start. So we're going to start easy by seeing how we can use extensions to better structure the content of a given file. Then we're going to see how we can use the result type to deal with a situation where a call, and more specifically an asynchronous call, can return either a result or an error. Then we're going to get started into really, you could say, like the meat of the topic. So we will introduce the notion of a view model. So a view model, in a nutshell, it's introducing an object that will be responsible for the business logic of a screen. Then after that, we will talk about dependency injection. So how can we make it so that inside our object, we can inject the dependencies, and this way we get some flexibility because we can inject a real object, but we can also inject a mock object. And so we are also going to see how we can implement a mock inside an iOS app. Once we have the mocks and the dependency injection, then it will be only natural to implement a testing suite. And finally, we will finish by implementing a pattern known as the coordinator. And the role of the coordinator is kind of similar to the view model, except that whereas the view model job is to encapsulate the business logic, the job of the coordinator is to encapsulate the navigation logic. And to finish, I will do you a small demo of Bitrise because we are going to set up the project that we will have built on Bitrise, and we will make it run, and we will make the test run on Bitrise. That's all for the introduction. And before I get started, just a quick reminder that the goal for this live is to be as interactive as possible. So any question that you have, please feel free to ask it in the chat, and I will do my best to answer it live. Okay, so let's get started first by taking a tour of the app I've built. So here is the app I built. As you can see, the app is fairly simple. First, we have a screen that displays a list of movies. So what's happening, technically speaking, is I am querying an API and I get movies and I display them. And then when I click on the cell that represents a movie, I navigate through a detail view controller that displays details of the movie, for instance, the poster or the credits, so meaning the actors and the name of their characters. So I see in the chat, hey, good evening, Walid, and Yash, you're asking, is it the same as the French stream from last week? Yes, it's exactly the same content, but done in English. Exact same content. Okay, so we've seen what the app does. It's basically two screens that query data from an API and then display it on the screen. And for the first screen, it also reacts to user events because I can click on a cell in the list to display the details of the corresponding movie. So we've seen how the app works, we've seen what it does. Now let's see how it is implemented. So first here we have the app delegate. As you can see, there is nothing special in the app delegate. It's just the code that was generated by default by Xcode. I haven't changed anything inside this file. And we actually won't change something during this live. Then we have the scene delegate. I also haven't changed anything inside this file, but control it to the delegate, we are going to update it at some point during the live. Then we have a big file called model, and this is where I have implemented basically the entirety of the model of my app. So it includes things like the API key, like the decodable types, so what I can decode from the JSON I get from my API. So I've got my movies, my movie response, which contains an array of movie. Then I have my JSON decoder. Then I have top level function to actually call my API. So here the function get movies, which takes as an argument a compression handler which returns either a movie response or an error. Inside, I have the call to my API. Inside, I make a call to the network using URL session shared data task. I decode the JSON, and if the decoding is successful, I call the compression handler with the result. Otherwise, I call with an error when there was an error in the network, and you can see I've even decided to crash if there was an error decoding the JSON. So as I was saying, we are starting from an app that was implemented, we could say, quick and dirty. And so, of course, all the code you're seeing is subject to improvements. Then we have another, so top level function to get the poster for a given movie. And it's the same thing, the same logic, except that this time the return type is a UI image. Then we have the same thing for the cast members with, once again, the decodable data types and the global function to call the API. And so you're asking any reason why I'm not using async await? It's mostly like to really keep the focus on architecture pattern and not go too much about async await. But I'm taking note of the suggestion. It could be actually a good idea, like among others, for like a second live. Maybe like talking about async await, talking about algebraic data types, that kind of thing. So maybe I will keep this in mind for next live on the topic. So we've seen the model. Then we can see, so the movie cell. So this is the cell that is displayed by the table view we just saw. Then we have here, so movies view controller. I'm going to move it a little bit above. So movies view controller, as you can see, it's a subclass of UI view controller. And inside, it's basically a massive view controller. So everything is happening inside this view controller in the sense that I've got the data to display. I've got also the logic to interact with the UI components. So here, the table view. I've got the logic to call the API and get the data. And finally, I've got the configuration of my table view. So here, the methods of UI table view data source. So table view, number of rows in section, and cell for row at index path. And finally, a way to react to interaction from the user. So here, the user selecting a specific row inside the table view, and this is done through the delegate method. So this time from UI table view delegate called did select row at index path. And finally, the movie details view controller, which once again, I think now you're getting the idea, is a massive view controller. And once again, we have everything inside. We can see we have the argument, we could say, of this view controller, which is the movie selected in the previous view controller. And as you can see, it is implicitly unwrapped, so potential source of crash, and maybe something we are going to want to improve later down the road. Once again, the data to display, and finally, in view did load, the logic to make the network calls. This time I said calls because there are two of them, one call to get the poster and one call to get the credits. And finally a second time, the implementation of UI table view data source with, once again, number of rows in section and cell forward index path. And this time there is no UI table view delegate because the user can't really interact with the table view except by scrolling it. Finally, we have the main storyboard. So I use storyboard to implement my views. So you can see first I have a navigation controller. It embeds my first view controller, so the upcoming movies. So the movies view controller we just saw, and the movie details view controller we just also saw. And so you can see everything is implemented inside this main storyboard. And finally, I have the assets, but there is nothing here. And same thing, the launch screen, I've left it blank. So it's time to get started and start improving the architecture of this app. And as I said during the intro, I want to start by something simple, but just to get us started, and it is to use extensions. So why do I want to use extensions? If you take a look at the class movies view controller, you can see, so first it says that it inherits from UI view controller, and that, well, basically has to be here. There is no other way to declare inheritance in Swift. But then you can see that the type movies view controller also conforms to two protocols, UI table view data source and UI table view delegate. And basically inside the same file, we have a lot of code because we have the code that is, we could say, like related to UI view controller. So the lifecycle of a UI view controller with methods like viewDidLoad, for instance. We also have the methods related to implementing UI table view data source. So we have them here and here. And finally, we have the method related to implementing UI table view delegate right here. And so when we think about it, basically our little class here is already like a little bit like, you know, like there is a lot of code and we would like maybe to not remove code, but maybe like organize it a little bit better. And this is where extensions come into play. So an extension is basically a way to take some code away from the, we could say, the definition of the class and put it someplace else where it's still part of the class, but it is in a different scope. And this way it makes the code a little bit easier to read and to reason about. So how does it look like to implement an extension? So we use the Swift keyword extension. Then we mention the name of the type that we want to extend. So here is going to be movies view controller. So we could stop here, but the really nice feature of extensions is that an extension can make a type conform to a given protocol. So here, for instance, I'm going to start with UI table view data source. Hello, Amy. So what I'm going to do, first I need to remove the declaration of the conformance here because confirming 2 times to the same protocol is a compiler error. So I'm going to remove it. And then I'm going to take the code of my two methods I had implemented to conform to UI table view data source. I'm going to select the code. I'm going to cut it. And I'm going to go back to my extension. And I'm going to paste the code. And so you can see the code hasn't changed. It has just been moved out of the implementation of the class, and now it's part of this extension. And what's nice is that the entire purpose of this extension is to conform to UI table view data source. This way, the only method we should find inside the extension will be methods that make our type conform to the protocol UI table view data source. Of course, we could also introduce, for instance, if there was a private method we need to call, we could also store it inside the extension. But the idea is that the extension only stores what is necessary to conform to the protocol. And so we've done this with the first protocol, UI table view data source. Of course, now it's only natural to try and do the same thing with the second protocol. So it's going to be UI table view delegate. So table view delegate like this. And so just like before, I'm going to select the code that had been implemented to conform to this protocol, cut it, and paste it inside the extension. And now when we take a look, oh, I had forgotten one thing. As I was saying, if you confirm 2 times, if you state 2 times that you confirm to the same protocol, it's an error. And so here it says redundant conformance to movies view controller to protocol UI table view delegate. And so the fix is easy. I'm sure you've already figured it out. I just need to go here and remove the first place where I had stated this conformance. Okay, now I'm just going to build my code to make sure it still builds. Yes, it still builds. And what's nice is that when we take a look at the code for my class, now we could say it feels much more organized and so more readable, because inside my class, I only find the state of my object and then the methods that are related to the fact that it inherits from UI view controller. So here the fact that it implements viewDidLoad. And then as I scroll down, I see other extensions. So first, an extension that makes my type conform to UI table view data source, and then another one that makes my type conform to UI table view delegate. And what's nice is that when we take a look, so when we take a look at the little outline here we don't necessarily see the extension appearing, but there is a nice way to see them, which is also a good practice, which is to use mark commands. So it looks like this. So it's like double slash, then mark, colon, and then you put a dash. And for instance, the name of the protocol you are implementing. Okay, let me do the same thing right here. Okay, so this time it's going to be UI table view delegate. And what's nice is that if I click back here, we can now see the conformance to each protocol being displayed in the outline of my file. And of course, let me also display the minimap. I am not sure it's here. Yes, you can see that it is. Ah, yeah, you can see it because it's hidden on the live. Sorry, but if you display the minimap, it also appears on the minimap. Let me just try and yes, you can see it. Perfect. And this way, I'm sure I won't be showing code that will be off screen. Okay, let me just hide the minimap because later on I'm going to need all the screen real estate I can get. Okay, perfect. So we've done this for the first view controller. Then we're going to do it for the second view controller. That's the reason I put two view controllers in this simple app. It's so that this way, um, basically, I can do the thing one time and then a second time, and I feel like it's better, like to getting our head around it. And I see a very interesting question. Can you have the extension in a different file? Yes, you can perfectly have your extension in a different file. Actually, you can also extend code that you don't even have the source code of. So like I wanted to say you can extend classes types that you don't have the source code of. So for instance, you could write an extension for UI view controller or for UI view, even though you definitely don't have the source code for this type inside your project. So yeah, you can put it in another file, even though I would say sometimes putting the extension in other files, it can make it a little bit like harder to read because you will have to switch between files. Sometimes it can make also the extension a little bit harder to discover. So I would say like if the type needs the extension to work, maybe put it in the same file. Here, that's the case because this view controller, without its conformance to UI table data source, it definitely like is not complete. We could say there is something missing. So in that case, I would argue let's put it in the same file. Now, if it's only to add some helpers method, for instance, it could make sense to like put it inside another file. But on that part, it's only like my opinion, and depending, of course, on the situation, it could be that it's not. It makes sense to split it across several files. But personally, I prefer not to do it. Okay, so I was about to do the same thing for movies detail view controller, so I'm going to do it pretty fast because now we are getting used to how it works. And as I was saying, just to get warmed up, it's pretty simple. So I write an extension on movie details view controller. I say that this extension makes movie details view controller conform to UI table view data source. And finally, I move the two methods. So what's nice is that they are just next to each other, so you can see it is very visual. I cut the code, I paste it here, and that's it. Now my second file has also been organized in extensions. I'm also going to add my mark comment because it's a good practice to do it. Okay. And so we are done with talking about extensions. Just before I move on, I'm going to build and launch the app once more just to make sure it's still working and I haven't like broken or forgot to put something back. So here the first table view is indeed working. And once again, I'm going to click on Top Gun Maverick just because I want to see it this morning. And you can see the details view is also working. Perfect. Let's put the app aside. And now let's move on to the second item for this live, which is to use the result type. And for this, we're going to leave the view controllers and we're going to go back to the model file. And I'm going to draw your attention to this method right here, for instance, that is used when we want to get our movies. So this method works with a completion handler, and there was a question about it. And the reason why I chose a completion handler and not using combine or async await is just to take the most basic approach and not focus on the async part, but more on like architectural issues. And so you can see that the way the completion handler is going to return the result of the network call is through two arguments. The first one is an optional movie response, and the second one is an optional error. When we read this, it seems kind of natural why we are using optionals here. It's because either the call could fail, either because there is no network or because the decoding failed, and so we would have an error, or the call succeeded, and so we would have a movie response. And we can see this being reflected in the code because, as you can see, when there is an error, I call my completion handler with nil for the first argument and the error for the second one. And when there has not been an error, I also call the completion handler, this time with the result of the network call as the first argument and nil for the second argument. And while this makes sense and this approach is actually used across the iOS SDK, there is one downside of this approach. And this downside, and I'm sure some of you have already figured it out, is that in the business logic of our app, there are only two possible states that are valid. It's either we have a result and we don't have an error, or we don't have a result and we do have an error. So only two possible states make sense. The issue is that when we represent the result through these two optional arguments, there are actually four possible states that can be implemented. Because of course we can pass a value for the first argument and nil for the second, and on the other way, nil for the first argument and an error for the second one. But we can also call the completion handler with nil for both arguments, and the compiler won't complain. Or we could even call the completion handler with both a response and also an error, and once again, the compiler wouldn't complain. And if we were to do it because of programmer error, then our code would probably behave in a way that would be very weird because our code won't be expecting this, and probably the result we're going to see is that either it's always going to present an error or maybe it will crash because of some kind of first unwrapping. Basically, something bad is probably going to happen, and the reason is that our code allowed us to represent two states, two configurations that don't make sense in the business logic of our application. And so the way to solve this issue is to actually make such states, so having either nil for the both arguments or an actual value for both arguments, to make them unrepresentable, meaning that it shouldn't be possible for us to write code in a way that we could pass nil for both arguments or a value for both arguments. And how do we implement a type that prevents such impossible states? It's actually fairly easy to do it because that type is already part of Swift, and it has been part of Swift since I think Swift 5, if I remember it correctly. So that type is called result. It takes two generic arguments. The first one is just the return type when there has been a success. So here it would be movie response. And the second argument is the type of the error when there has been an error. And here it's just going to be error because I'm using Swift generic error protocol. And so to understand how this type works, let's see how it has been implemented. So for that, I'm going to do a command click and then jump to definition. And you can see that this type is implemented actually as an enum. This enum has two possible cases. So the first case is called success, and this case has an associated value of type success, so the first generic type of the result. And the second case is called failure. It also has an associated value, which is of type failure, the second generic argument of the result, and failure must conform to the protocol error. And the way this works is that since this is an enum, both cases are mutually exclusive. So we will either pass a success with a value of type success or a failure with a value of type failure. And so with this simple type, it becomes impossible to pass nil for both the success and the failure, so to not provide the value, because there is no case in the enum that represents this case. And it's also not possible to both pass a success and a failure, because there is, again, no case in the enum that allows us to have two associated values, one of type success and one of type failure. So the reason I wanted to show you this is that if you're not familiar with the type result, it's actually a super interesting trick, and it's something that you can apply. Like this principle of using enums with associated values is something very simple, but as we've just seen, very powerful. And just to give you the name, if you want to learn more about it, this technique of using an enum with mutually exclusive cases and each case having one or more associated value, it's called an algebraic data type. And if you want to learn more, I'm sure I already have a video on the topic on my channel. And just let me look at the chat. And so I'm glad to see that you're liking to have this content also in English. And of course, big thank you to Bitwise, who sponsored both sessions, the one in French and the one in English. Okay, so now we understand how the result type works and we know how to use it inside an API. Let's just rework our code in order for it to work with the result type. So I basically need to change the call size to my completion handler. So here I can no longer pass two arguments because there is only a single argument. And that argument can take, as we've seen, two possible cases, success and failure. Here I'm going to use failure and I pass as an associated value the error that would have happened. Then what I'm going to do for the success case is the same logic, except that I'm going to use the success case and I will pass my decoded value. And finally, I'm also going to improve on this try exclamation mark right here. So this code would crash if there was an error debugging, decoding my JSON. But of course, this is not a good practice because you don't want to crash in production inside your app. You definitely don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to introduce a do block. I'm going to take this code right here, cut and paste inside, get rid of the question mark, and instead of crashing when an error happens, I'm going to write a catch block, and inside this block, I will just say, well, call the completion handler with a failure and the error, and this time it would be a decoding error. And last thing I need to do, since my error in the case of a failure is no longer an optional, I need to force unwrap this, which makes sense to use it here because I've tested inside my guard that when I am in the else, it's because the error is not nil, so there is an error, so it's okay to use a force unwrap here. And finally, of course, I need to take this code right here and move it inside the do block also. Perfect. Okay, so let me see that the get movies function builds. Perfect, it builds successfully. So now let's do the exact same thing for the two other ones. So first we do it with get poster. So once again, same strategy. Instead of having two arguments, an optional UI image, and an optional error, I have only one argument, which is a result. The success generic argument is going to be UI image, and the second one is going to be an error. So here, just like before, I call the failure case and I pass in the error with a force unwrap. And here is going to be slightly different. So here I'm going to pass in a success with my decoded UI image, but you see it's not going to build. And it says I'm trying to pass a value of optional type UI image, but it should be a UI image. And the reason is that indeed here I'm no longer saying I want an optional. But if it makes sense in my case to have an optional image, I can actually do it. So like this, as you can see, I can have optional values for the success case of my result. If it makes sense in the content of my app, I can represent this by using an optional right here. There is nothing preventing me from doing it. So here, it's a question of choice. We could say I could either return an error and then handle it in the UI, or I could return nil. Since the image property of a UI image view can be nil, I'm just going to return nil for this case. But in an app, you could choose which one makes the most sense depending on your context. Finally, we're going to do the same thing one last time, so the final time, and it's going to be for the global function get credits, because we don't have methods yet. We just have global function. Nothing has been architectured. So I'm going to use the result type for the third and final time. So my success is going to be a movie credits response. The error is still going to be just the protocol error. and inside now we're getting the hang of it. So I do failure when there is a failure. I pass in the error. Then I'm going to introduce a do block. Inside the do block, I move the code that decodes the JSON I get from the API. So I get rid of the crash when there is an error decoding. Instead, when the decoding has been successful, I pass in the success case with my decoded response. And for the potential decoding error, I introduce a catch block. And inside the catch block, I call my completion with the failure case and the error that would have happened. Okay, let's see if my app builds successfully. No, it does not build successfully, and it makes sense because I still need to change the call size inside my view controllers. But this file here, it builds successfully. And I see a good remark in the chat, so I can do guard let error equal error, and we can use error without, can we or cannot we? Well, let me try to do it. So you're suggesting here, I could do guard let error equal error else. So let's see what it does. And unfortunately, it's not going to work because what this guard syntax does is that after the guard block, the error is actually non-optional. But here, that's not what I want to do. I want to deal with the case, basically like the rest of my functions should only execute if the error is nil. So it's a little bit like confusing, and I'm not going to lie, like I made the same mistake when I wrote the code the first time, but this is actually how you want to write it, and the way it reads is that you want to make sure that the error is nil before you move on to the following code, and if the error is not nil, so if this condition here evaluates to false, then you fall into the else block, and here the error, you can safely unwrap it because you know that it is indeed not nil because that's the very condition you had used inside the guard statement. But I agree, it's not perfect that there is no mechanism to say, okay, since we are in the else block and the condition was on the nullability of the variable error, the compiler should be able to know that here error is not nil. I know that the language they have on Android called Kotlin has this feature. It's called the smart cast, but on Swift we don't have this feature yet. And indeed, so you could use an if, but I would prefer to use a guard because the idea of a guard is to first deal with it's a good question. It's a very good question. Glad I can talk about it because I wouldn't have thought about it otherwise. But having a guard statement here, I think it makes more sense to do guard error equal nil, deal with the potential error in the else block, and then follow on with your code, rather than doing if data equal data, because this way the normal code is not nested inside an if statement. We could say we evacuate or we deal with the error case early on in the function, and then the rest of the function is just the happy path. And that's why guard was introduced, because guard was introduced with Swift like 2, one of the versions of Swift 2, if I remember it correctly. And personally, I prefer this pattern than having an if statement and having all the happy path, all the normal path of our method be inside one extra level of nesting. Okay, let me move back to the view controller. So we need to update them. It should be fairly easy to do. So here we no longer have two arguments. We only have one, which is the result. And if you remember, what I've shown you is that result is implemented as an enum. So how do we deal with a value of type result? Well, we do what we do with every enum. We switch over it. So I switch over my result, and there are two possible cases I need to deal with. So I'm just going to let the compiler write them for me because I'm a bit lazy. So I have my success and my failure case. And in the success case, I can bind the associated value, which is going to be my response. Okay, what do I do when I have my response? I just take this code right here, I cut it, and I paste it here. And what do I do when there is a failure? Up until now, I was just doing nothing. So I was ignoring the error. I'm going to keep doing the same thing because I don't want to deal with the error to keep the code simple. So I'm just going to not bind the associated value. So I'm just ignoring it, we could say. And inside my case, I'm just going to write break. Okay? I just need to use the correct identifier here. Okay? So this is building. So before I move on, 2 remarks I want to make. First, what's interesting to see is that since we're switching over an enum, the compiler is going to force us to handle with all the possible cases. Meaning that if I were only interested in the success and I didn't handle the failure case, I would get a compiler error that would say switch must be exhaustive. And so the compiler would tell me, okay, you need to deal with the failure case. So first thing is that the compiler is going to enforce this exhaustivity, which is good because it means that when our app builds successfully, we can be confident that we have indeed managed to deal with all possible cases, because if we haven't, the compiler is going to emit an error. And second remark is that when case, so when a possible case, a possible, also you can see the term pattern matching for the case, when a pattern was matched, you need to have at least one instruction inside that pattern. So if I remove the break and put nothing, you see, second compiler error, it says case label in a switch must have at least one executable statement. And the purpose of this is to not have a case that would be left empty by mistake. So if I don't want to do anything, if I don't want to do anything, yeah, I need to explicitly state it to the compiler by using the keyword break here. Okay, so I updated the call site in the first view controller. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the second view controller. So here I have 2 call sites to deal with, but it's going to be the same logic. So I take a result as an argument now. So result is still an enum, so I still switch over it. Okay, this time I'm going to write it. So case let success. So I have my poster. What do I do in this case? I just move this code right here. I also have my failure case, and for this one, so I ignore the associated value, so the actual error, and I just break because I don't do anything. So I've updated the first call site, so the call site to get poster. Then I do the same thing for get credits. So once again, there are no more 2 arguments. Now there is only one, my result. Okay, still switching over that result. So still have my success case. So case let success with the response. Okay, I just move the code that was already written. And for the last thing, I handle the failure case and I just do nothing. Perfect. And I just remove the code below. Okay. Let's build and run the app again. Okay, first I need to use the correct identifier. Perfect. Let's launch the app again and let's see. So we can see the first screen is still working and the second screen is also working. So our app is still doing the same thing, but our refactor is done. And now we are using the result type. And what's great with using the result type is that now, well, we can only represent 2 states as a result of a network call, either a success or a failure, but there is no longer a risk of passing 2 nil values or passing both a result and an error, because these 2 states, they don't make any sense in the logic of our app. Okay, we're done with the easy part, with the warm-up part, and now we are getting started with the more, I don't want to say complex, because you're going to see it's pretty easy to understand once you break it down into pieces, but the more interesting parts, and we're going to introduce a view model. But first, it's time for some water. Okay, let's get started by implementing a first view model. For this, I'm going to go into my movies view controller. And before I do, I want to first discuss why it would make sense to introduce a view model. And for that, I would like to list the responsibilities of my class movies view controller. So what are its responsibilities? So first, it needs to display some data on the screen. So we could say manage the UI. So managing the UI, actually, it includes 2 things: displaying data and reacting to interaction made by the user. So that's the first responsibility. Then it also needs to know where to get the data. So it needs to know to call the method get movies. Once it has gotten this data, it needs to know what to do with it. So for instance, here it's very simple. It's just calling the result property, but it could be more complex stuff, like for instance, doing a sort, doing a filtering logic. And finally, it needs to know how to react to a particular user interaction, but in the sense of where to navigate. And that's basically, we could say, three responsibilities. So manage the UI, get the data, and handle the navigation. And what I'm going to want to do over this live is, well, for the view controller, only to keep the first responsibility, so managing the UI, because that's the very purpose of a UI view controller. But for the two other responsibilities, so managing, knowing how to get and format and parse and prepare the data, I would like to put it in a type of its own, which is going to be the view model. And for the navigation part, it will be in the view controller, but we're going to do it a little bit later in this live. So let's start with the view model. But first, a question: are we going to use the service pattern for the network layer? Yes, I'm going to introduce services when I start talking about dependency injection. So it's going to arrive in like 20-30 minutes, something like this. Okay, so let's create a view model for my movies view controller. So for that, I create a new file, a new Swift file. I'm going to call it movies view model. Okay, so it's just going to be basic Swift class. So movies view model. Okay, and what are we going to find inside this view model? So basically, I'm going to take code from the view controller and move it onto the view model. So can I do it? Yes, I can do it like this. Perfect. This will be like very visual. Perfect. So first, these movies here, this array of movie, I definitely want to move it over to the view model. Not the part about reloading table view, because that's managing the UI, and so that's still the responsibility of the view controller. So I'm just going to move this part. Of course, I know this code doesn't build. We are going to fix it later. And I'm going to paste this inside the view model. Okay. Then this code right here, that's definitely something that should be inside the view model, because it's about knowing how to get data and then how to process it, how to make it ready to be displayed. So I'm going to take this code. I'm going to, of course, I cannot just move it here inside the class. I need to put it inside a method of my view model. And so it's a method I will call fetch data. And so now that I have this method, I can go back here, cut the code and paste it inside the method fetch data. Okay, are there other things that should be moved? I'm going to argue that no, I have everything I need. So now let's just display the view model in full. And so up until now, we are doing pretty good. The only thing is that how will my view controller know when there is a new value available inside this array of movies? So this is where frameworks like, for instance, Eric Swift or combine by using the add published annotation would come into play. But as I said in this live, I want to be as simple as possible. And so we are going to use a little type that I have created on my end. So I'm going to create another file. So it's going to be a file called variable, like this. I'm going to open, so this file, you can see I've implemented it before the live. So I'm going to copy and paste the code and explain to you the ID. So what's a variable? It's a class that holds a value that can be just about anything. And as you can see, both this class holds both the values, the current value, we could say, but also a closure called onUpdate. And that closure, when it is called, it is passed also as an argument the current value. And the way it works is that whenever a new value is set here, inside the didSet property observer, the closure is called and is being called on the main queue, on the main thread, because as you can imagine, inside onUpdate, we will probably find our view controller manipulating UIKit object. And as I'm sure you already know, if you try to use a UIKit object on any other thread than the main thread, that's a crash for your app because it's forbidden to touch a UIKit object outside the main thread. So once I have this type variable, I can use it inside my view model, and so my view model will not be storing an array of movie, but rather a variable that contains an array of movies. So of course I can no longer pass in the empty array for initial value, but I'm going to create my variable with an initial value which is the empty array. And finally, when I get the result from my network call, I'm going to call the property. So I'm going to update the property value on my variable. And I can get rid of this call to dispatch queue main async because this is being now encapsulated inside my variable. Okay, so I think now my view model is ready. Maybe I've forgotten something, but it seems pretty ready for me. So I can go back to my view controller and I can actually use the view model. So I'm going to display once again side by side so you can see the view model while I update the movies view controller. So this code right here, I said I still want to keep it. So how am I going to use it? Well, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to first I need to have a view model. So let me create the view model. So like this way now my view controller has an instance of its view model. And what I'm gonna do is that in viewDidLoad, I will configure the view model. So I will say view model.movies.onUpdate. So my view controller is going to register to set the closure that will be called whenever the movies array is updated with a new value. And inside this closure, so I'm just going to ignore the value of the argument because I just want to reload my table view. And of course, I'm going to use weak self here because otherwise I would create a retain cycle. So I have my view model being configured. Now, of course, I also need to call fetch data inside my view model, and I am almost there. The only thing is that now, while movies is no longer part of the state of my view controller, but rather I need to do view model.movies.value. So a little bit more code here, but I still think it's worth it because now the business logic has been encapsulated outside of the view controller. I also need to update the code right here and right there. Perfect. Okay, build succeeded. So let me launch the app once again, and we can see the app is still working. So the refactor has not changed anything of what my app is doing. But now we can see that my view controller, it's getting more and more clean, more and more, we could say like small. And that's on purpose because now my view controller is only focusing more on its like core responsibilities because it's only responsible for managing the UI and also navigation, which I will want to get rid of also later. But at least the entire part about where do we get data, what we get the data, how do we prepare it, how do we make it ready to be displayed, it has now been encapsulated inside the view model. So of course, I think now you're starting to get the idea of how this works. We're going to do the same thing for the second view controller. So I'm starting to see that there is quite some code here inside my file structure. So I'm going to introduce a few groups because it will make my file structure more readable. So I have my movies group. I'm going to have my movie details group. Perfect. And so I'm going to display my movie details view controller, and I'm going to introduce here also a view model, so called movie details view model. So like this, I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing for the previous view controller. So I'm going to create my movie details view model. So like here, I'm going to move basically all the content of my view controller that was related to my business logic inside the view model. So for instance, here the movie, it's definitely going to move into the view model. So the movie is the movie we're displaying. So it's the argument of this second screen. Actually, I can change it from a var to can I change to a var to a let? I'm not sure. We will see. Like I will be able to do it in the end, but right now I'm not sure. So I have my movie. I also have the result of my network call, so the array of cast members. So I'm going to have it here. And of course, just like with the previous view controller, I'm going to store it inside a variable because when the value changes, I want my UI to be updated. So like this. And I think I need to provide the name value, yes, to the argument. Okay, perfect. Then I will have my method fetch data like this. And this code here to get poster is going to be stored inside fetch data. So the result of the argument, I'm not going to store it actually. I will just the closure will take the argument. So I don't need to store it inside my view model. I need to store the array because the table view needs to access it, but here I don't think I need it. So actually here I don't need the value in the call. Perfect. So get poster, I need to fix the call. So what can I do? Actually, I think I'm going to. I was saying I don't need a variable, but I definitely got ahead of myself because I need a variable if I want to have somewhere to register the closure. So I will also have a variable which will be of type UI image. So like this. Here the initial value will be nil. Perfect. And what I'm gonna be doing here is poster and not .image, but rather .value. Okay, this now builds successfully. Now I need to move on the second call also inside get credits. So perfect. So let me just update the code. So once again, I get rid of the call to dispatch queue main async, and here it's cast.value. All right. I think we're almost there. For the view model, it seems to be pretty okay. Now it's time to use that view model. So just like before, I'm going to have my view model, so like this, and it's going to be a movie details view model. Okay. So this code here, I can just remove it. So what I'm going to do is that, so the movie, it is now stored inside the view model. This one is not a variable because actually it's not going to change when it changes. It shouldn't change. It's just a var because right now I need to be a var, but later on it will become a let. So I can just set the title of the view controller and the overview label based on the value of this movie. Okay, perfect. Then I have my table view data source that is still here. Then I'm going to configure the onUpdate closures on the properties of my view model. So first for the poster, so when there is a new poster, what do I want to do? So I'm going to use once again weak self. I'm going to say, well, when there is a new poster, what I want to do is take my poster image view, so like this, and I want to set its image to be the new poster. And same thing for the array of cast members. So when there is a new array of cast member, what do I want to do? I want to do the exact same thing that I was doing in the previous view controller when there was a new array of movie. So I'm just going to ignore the actual value of the array, and instead I'm going to call on my table view reload data. And finally, here, when I want to access the array, so in the method of UI table view data source, I want to do view model.cast.value, and I do the second thing inside the second method. Okay, I forgot, of course, the most important thing, which is, did you figure out what I've forgotten? I forgot on the view model to call fetch data in order to actually trigger the two network calls. Let's see. Build failed. I have a mistake somewhere. So let's see. Where is this mistake? Oh, it's here. I forgot. Yeah, because there is not, the movie is no longer stored in the details view controller, but rather in its view model. Okay, let me build and run the app once more. So we've already seen that the first screen is working, but that we have already set its view model before. Now when I click, so let me get another movie like Jurassic World Dominion. And as you can see, the second screen is also working as expected, except that this time the network calls. So both the one to get the poster and the one to get the array of cast members here. They're no longer implemented. So inside movie details view controller, as you can see, this code has been moved on to the view model. And so the view controller can only focus on its core responsibility, which is displaying data on the UI and reacting to user events on the UI. And so we have successfully introduced the concept of view models inside our app. So we are getting closer to having a scalable architecture. We are not there yet because, as you can see, the view model, we could say that the view controller still needs to know how to build the view model. It needs to know how to use it. So by how to use it, I mean which on update closure to set and which method to call to get the data. So this is how to use the view model, but the view controller also needs to know how to create it. And I want to get that responsibility of how to create the view model outside of the view controller. And this is actually what we call dependency injection. So how are we going to implement this dependency injection pattern? To do this, I'm going to introduce yet again a new type. So this type is going to be called view controller. Actually, let me get rid of the simulator because it's going to start hiding the code. So it's called view controller provider. And the job of this type is going to be to provide either static properties or static methods to instantiate dynamically a given view controller. So I'm going to create a struct called view controller provider. Okay, I'm going to do a private init of this struct because it's just going to be a struct with a static member, so I don't want it to be instantiable. I'm going to implement a first static property, which will be my movies view controller. Okay, it will be of type movies view controller. So this is when I'm starting to not stop using storyboard, but stop using storyboard to manage the startup of my app. I want to get control over this. But first, how can I create at runtime an instance of movies view controller? So everything I have is in my view controller is defined in a storyboard. So I'm going to have to use it. So I'm going to instantiate a UI storyboard. So the name will be main because, as you can see, that's the name of my storyboard, at least the storyboard where the view controller is defined. The bundle will be nil because it's in the main bundle, so I don't need to provide a specific bundle. And then I want to instantiate the view controller with the identifier. And let me see what is the identifier I have set for my view controller. Okay, so it should be here. Actually, I haven't set one, so I'm just going to set the identifier being the same as the name of the type. This way it will be easier. So like this. So here I need to do a force cast, unfortunately, because that's the only way to do it. I'm going to store the result in a local variable that I will return. Okay. Of course, I need to return the movies view controller. Okay, so I've implemented this static property. Then I need to use it somewhere. So I'm going to use it actually inside the scene delegate. And because this code is particularly error prone, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So let me see. I'm going to just copy this code right here. Okay. So we don't yet have a coordinator, so I'm going to get rid of it. And so you can see now I'm creating manually my window. I'm setting my scene, my current scene inside my window. I create a navigation controller. So what will be its root view controller is going to be my movies view controller. So let me create my movies view controller. And for that, I will use my view controller provider to get an instance of movies view controller. This way I can pass it as the root view controller right here. Okay, so if I build my scene delegate should build. I just need, for it to actually be executed, I need to do two things. So first, inside my project, I need to get rid of the main interface here. And then inside the plist, I need to go here and get rid of it also. Let me see if it still works. Yes, it still works. But what's great is that now I have control over the way my initial view controller is created. And so I'm going to be able to finally inject my view model. So what does it make to be able to inject the view model? It means that my movies view controller will no longer know how the movies view model is instantiated. Instead, it will only know how to use it. So basically, I remove the call to the initializer, and instead, I just store a view model of type movies view model. Unfortunately, I cannot use the init to pass it because, as you can see, I don't have control over this init. The init is called by the classes that deal with the storyboard. So the best option I have here is to actually do the same thing than my UIKit object that use interface builder are doing, which is to have an implicitly unwrapped property. So now this should, so now I need to make it a var because it will be set after the init has been called. And so in my view controller provider, now it will be the job of the view controller provider to instantiate and inject the view model. So it's going to be like this. So I do movies view model. So I instantiate an instance of movies view model. And finally, before returning my movies view controller, I set its view model. So it's going to look like this. Going to build and run the code again. We can see it's still working. So actually here we have implemented a first version of a dependency injection. It might not seem extremely useful for now, but you're going to see that having that injection point, meaning being able to inject a different value for one of the property of an object at runtime, is going to prove to be pretty powerful. But before we move on to actually using this injection point to implement something powerful like mocked network calls, I'm going to do the same thing for my second view controller so we can make sure we've really understood how this works. So what do I do? As I said, implementing dependency injection, meaning knowing how to use an object but not knowing how it has been created. So I get rid of the call to the init. Since I don't have control over the init of movie details view controller, I need to have a property that is implicitly unwrapped. And you can notice that this is the same strategy that interface builder is using. And actually, interface builder, it's also a kind of dependency injection framework when you think about it, because its goal, we have our view controller knows how to use its IB outlet, but it doesn't know how they have been built. So it's the exact same logic. And so what I'm going to do is that in my view controller provider, I will implement a second, not this time, not a static property, but rather a static method. Why? Because I need an argument to build this details view controller, which is the movie to display the details of. So it will be a static func, and it will be details of, no, I should call it, no, it's not a good name. It should be movie details view controller for, and then the movie is passed as an argument, and the return of the type of the function is a movie details view controller. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to follow the same logic than above. So first I create my movie details view controller. It will be shorter that way. So for that I need my storyboard. So it's still inside the main storyboard in the main bundle. And for this I can use the shortcut nil. I need to get the storyboard ID of this details view controller. So I can get it here. And I'm just going to harmonize it and use always the name of the type. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to instantiate a view controller with this identifier, and I'm going to force cast it as a movie details view controller. Here I'm doing a forced cast because I consider that if the cast fails, it means there is a very big developer error inside my app. I don't know how to create view controller I'm supposed to show, and so I would rather crash than display an error message. You could actually display an error message to say this feature is unavailable, but it could still be a very, very big issue. So like you would want to have tests that call these methods. You would want to call these methods inside your test to make sure that you are indeed able to instantiate the view controllers. And actually, maybe we'll implement this later when we start talking about tests. But first, so I've instantiated my movie details VC. Then I need to instantiate its view model. So movie details view model. So it's a movie details view model. What's nice is that this time I can actually update my view model and get rid here of the. Here I was having something implicitly unwrapped because I didn't have control over the init before. It needed to be called by the view controller, the previous view controller, and it like at the point of its init, movie details view controller didn't know what the movie was. But here, what's nice is that I have complete control over the init of movie details view model because, as you've seen, I am the one calling the init, and so I can get rid of this question mark. I can turn this into a proper constant, and what I can do is to then define my init, and so this init will take a movie as an argument, and it will set the movie constant. And so now I no longer have my implicit unwrap value, and it becomes impossible to construct an instance of type movie details view model without providing the actual value for the movie. And so here, when I create my view model, I will provide my movie. I will have it because it's an argument of my static function. So now I have my movie details view model. I need to set it onto my movie details view controller. Perfect. And finally, I need to return the view controller like this. And last thing I need to do is inside my movies view controller. So at the moment where I need to instantiate here a movie details view controller, I'm going to get rid of this code and instead use my view controller provider to say, okay, I want the movie details view controller for the given movie. I'm going to pass my movie. And here, actually, I no longer need this code right here because I've provided the value there in a much safer way. And what's nice also is that since this is now a dependency injection, here I could, if it makes sense inside my app, dynamically, depending on the type of movie, return, why not, a different view controller. So of course I would need like a superclass or an interface or protocol, something like this. But I could, for instance, depending of whether like the movie has been released or has not been released, I don't know, like return two different kinds of view controller. That's one of the added advantage of doing dependency injection. Okay, so now we are able to inject view models inside our view controller. Let's go even a step further and let's be able to inject a service inside our view model. And this way, with this servicing layer, so what you were asking for, Kevin, we will be able to do a mock version of our app. And so I was talking of service, it means that it's time to finally get the case of this big model file and start splitting it also into other files. Okay, I'm going to start with the movies. So I'm going to create a new type. So movies service, okay? I'm going to start moving code from the model to the movies service class. So first I'm going to create that class. So movies service, so like this. I'm going to move code. So for instance, the structs, I'm going to move them at least to the movie service file. In a better structure, you would want to move them to their own file, but here to keep things simple and also to have like everything displayed on the screen at the same time, I'm going to keep them in the same file. So I'm still going to keep the API key and the JSON decoder inside the model file, but of course the get movies method, the get movies function global function, I'm going to cut it and paste it inside movies service. And so now it has become an instance method of that class. Okay, I think that's all I need to know for my movies service. And so now if I go back to my movies view model, we should see that it should no longer build because the method getMovies no longer exists. So I'm going to make it so that my movies view model uses a movie service, and this movie service can be injected. So it's going to be a let constant because that instance shouldn't change over the lifetime of a movies view model. So it's going to be a service. It's going to be of type movies service. So once again, I want to be able to inject it. So I'm not going to build it here. Instead, I will have an init where this service can be passed as an argument. And with the value passed as an argument, I will set my service stored in my constant. So like this. And then when I want to call getMovies, I'm no longer calling a global function, but rather I'm calling a method of my service. Okay, I'm almost there. Now I have an error inside my view controller provider because I need a service to instantiate my view model. So actually, I'm going to switch the order of these lines because it will be much more logical to first create the service, then the view model, then the view controller, like to start with like the lower level of the dependency tree and then build more complex objects as I go. So here I'm going to have my movie service. And for now, I'm just going to instantiate an instance of movie service. And so when I create the view model, I pass in the movie service as an argument. Perfect. Let's build the app and see it's still working. Okay. Now, of course, the entire point of this operation is to be able to inject other kind of services than the one that call the actual API, but why not, for instance, a movie service that will return a mock, so some hard-coded data. And so let's do it. But if I want to be able to implement a mocked version, so I could do it in two ways. First, I could do something like a little bit dirty, like for instance, mock movies service, and I would do a subclass of movie service. It would work, but it's a bit dirty. The better option is to actually first define a protocol. So this protocol will be called, I will call it movies servicing, and its requirement will be to implement the method to get the movies. And of course, my class movies service will implement movies servicing. So like this. And what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to implement, first I need to do one thing. Inside my view model, I no longer take a movie service, but a movie servicing. So it could be anything that implements the protocol. Okay, the app still builds, and now I can actually implement my mocked movies service. So it's going to be also a class. I'm going to call it mock movies service. It's also going to implement movies servicing. So I'm going to let the compiler write the signature of the method, once again, because I'm super lazy. And so as for the code, I'm going to get something I've already written beforehand. So yeah, this array with the movie response, okay, because I don't want to write it by hand during the live. It would be way too long. So it's just like a bunch of movies, like 3 movies actually, returned previously by the API, and I just got like this data by doing a print of the return of the actual API. And so what I'm gonna do now is that now that I have this response, which is hard-coded, it's a mock value, I can just call my completion handler and pass in the success case with this response, like this. Okay, and what I can do now is that inside the method that creates the movies view controller, I can change my code so that it no longer returns an instance of movies service, which calls the actual API over the internet, but rather an instance of mock movies service. And if I launch my app, you can see that now I have a mocked version of my app. So this can be extremely useful when you want to, like, for instance, have always the same data to test your app. if like you're developing an app and the web services either are not ready yet, or there is a bug in the web service that you need to get around. It can be even more useful to have to return error cases, because sometimes it's difficult to trigger a particular error with the actual web services, but you can test that your app handles the error correctly by injecting a version of the service that always return said error. And we will see it a little bit later. Mocks are also super useful to write tests. But first, I have a question, which is, will it be possible to use async await with network calls we have, and will it make our code better? It would be possible, definitely. It would make the code easier to read, definitely also. Even though in that case, like of course using async await is better, but completion handlers are not, I would say, that bad, because we're only making one network call. Completion handlers get really like out of hand when you need to make like several network calls, either like sequentially or in parallel, and then synchronize their return. Here that's not the case. That's why I'm not using async await, but indeed async await would be nice. And given that yeah, there is popular demand for it, maybe it will be like the subject of a future live about some even more advanced iOS architecture best practices. But let's stay on the current topic. And so I'm going to do the same thing for my movie details. So I'm going to create a second service. So I call it movie details service. So now you're starting to get the hang of it. So I go back to my model file and I start extracting stuff. So what I'm going to extract? So I'm going to create first my class. So movie details service. So like this. So of course, get poster is going to be part of it. The two types here are also going to be part of it. And get credits is also going to be part of it. I'm just going to have to import UI kit here because I want to be able to use UI image. Okay. So now in my model, I only have my API key and my chain decoder. It has gotten much smaller. All right. Let's go back to movie detail service. Okay, so I need to be able to use this movie detail service inside movie details view model. So we're starting to know what the logic is. So I create a service. It's a let constant because it's not going to change over the lifetime of the object. So it's going to be a movie detail service. Perfect. Inside the init, so the init is already been created, so I don't need to create one, but I need to add the new extra argument to it. So like this, and I do the member-wise initialization. Perfect. Okay, and of course now I'm no longer calling global functions, but I'm rather calling methods of my local dependency. Of course, I want to be able to inject a mocked version here also. First, let me see, it says it's not building. Oh yeah, because of course I need to update also here, so I'm going to do the same thing. So first, I reverse the order of the things, of the lines. Perfect. I start by instantiating the movie details service. So for now, it's just a movie details service like this. And I pass it as a second argument to my view model. Perfect. The app is building successfully. And so now I want to implement the mocked version. So first, if you remember, I need to define a common interface, so a protocol. I'll call it movie details servicing. Better like this. It will have two requirements. First, the method get poster, and then the method get credits, like this. Of course, my movie details service is going to implement movie details servicing. Better. And I just have one thing left to do, which is to implement my mock. So it will be mock movie details service. It implements movie details servicing. Perfect. I need to implement my two methods with mocked data. And hello Mihai, and I'm super glad to see that you are enjoying the content. Perfect. Always a great motivation to have that kind of messages during the live. Okay, so I need to implement the two methods. So for the poster, I could have like found a way to create an instance of data that would have been decoded, but I figure let's go for something simpler. Let's just create a hard-coded image in the asset catalog. So it will be called mock poster like this. I'm going to make it a single scale resource. And actually, I've already downloaded a poster. So it will be Jurassic World Dominion this time, and not Top Gun Maverick, because I've actually prepared the content before watching the movie this morning. But I would have liked to display, like, Top Gun Maverick is a really cool movie. I would recommend you go watch it. But let's get back to the topic. So inside my mock service, what do I do to implement my poster? I get my mock poster. So it's going to be UI image named, so mock underscore poster. So like this. And then I just call the completion and I pass in success with my mock poster. So I've done the first of the two methods. For the get credit, as you can imagine, I'm not going to write by hand an array with like a few or 3 or 4 dozens of cast members. Instead, I've also prepared it beforehand. As you can see, there is quite a good number of them. So let's copy and paste. So we have the big response, and it's close to like, yeah, something like 30 lines. And I can just call the completion handler, also pass in a success case, and pass in this response. Okay, we're almost there. Just need to do one last thing, which is to pass in the mocked service here also, like this, and see if indeed we are displaying the mocked data. Why is it not working? Oh, I know why. Did you figure out why? I'm just going to display the error message so that you can like figure out it also. So cannot convert value of type mock details service to explicit argument type mock details movie details service. So I'm passing a mock, but it expects a movie detail service. Why? The answer is I forgot to update the init of my view model to take an instance of movie detail servicing, the protocol, and not the actual class. So I need to fix this error, but we can notice that the good thing is that the error was spotted by the compiler at compile time. So there is no risk of me missing the error and then shipping an app that crashes when we try to get to the screen. So that's actually a very good thing. That's a very good kind of error. So let's get back to the view model and update it. So here we take servicing and here servicing. Okay, the app is now building again. And so the mock is successful, as you can see. And of course, since now both services are mocked, actually, regardless on which movie I click, it will always display the same data in the mocked details view, in the movie details view controller, which will be the mock data about the movie Jurassic Park Dominion. But we've implemented our mocked version of our app. So it's not perfect yet, because as you can see, I need to change my code here, well, for it to switch between mocked and live. So of course, I would like to do something better. So how can we do it? First, I'm going to introduce an enum called app configuration. I'm going to say that there are two cases, either I'm going to call it web and a case mock, for instance. No, live is better than web. Live and mock. Then there will be a let constant here, so called app configuration. It will be of type app configuration. So I'm going to see, for instance, it's supposed to be live. And what I'm going to do then is that I'm going to refactor the code of my view controller provider for it to actually, well, rely on this app configuration to know whether to instantiate a mock or a live version of the service. And so the way it's going to work is that my mock service, it will be still a let constant, but of type here movies servicing, like this. And then I'm gonna switch over my enum like this. And when it's the case live, I'm gonna do movie service. I instantiate my movie service. And when I'm in a mock, I'm going to instantiate a mock movie service, just like this. Okay, the app is still building successfully. Now I'm going to do the same thing. So for the second view controller, so here is going to be of type movie details servicing. Then I switch over my app configuration. When it's alive, movie details service will be the actual service. So now it's that one that points to the actual API queried over the internet. And when it's a mock, it's going to be, well, just the mock. So mock detail service. So it's already better because we only need to change this piece of code right here. But we want to make it even better so that we can change it by the configuration inside Xcode. And the way to do it is to go, so I want to go here inside my project. So I have debug. I want to create a new build configuration that's going to duplicate debug. I'm going to call it debug mock. What I'm gonna do then inside my build settings, so I'm going to look for something called Swift flags. So here, and I'm gonna say when it's in debug mock, I want to have an additional flag called mock, so like this. And then inside my code right here, I'm gonna do, okay, well, when the flag mock is present, you build that code where I have the app configuration variable set with the value mock, and else, so when the flag mock is not there, you still build this exact same constant, so like this, but this time the value will be live. And the way this works, so this hashtag if, it's called conditional compilation, and basically, I need to add an end if here, when mock is set, this code is built, and this code here in the else block is completely ignored by the compiler. And conversely, when mock is not set, this code here is ignored by the compiler. It doesn't exist in the eye of the compiler, and this code here is being built. And so last thing I need to do is that I need to manage my schemes. And so I'm going to create a new scheme by duplicating it. So I'm going to duplicate my scheme app architecture. I'm going to call it mock app architecture, and I'm gonna say this scheme is going to use debug mock both for running, and testing the app. And so now, if I haven't forgotten anything, when I launch my app, you can see with the regular scheme. So let's launch the app. As you can see, it shows the live data. It's because this code right here is built. But when I switch to the other scheme, so the one that uses the debug mock build configuration, this flag is set. And so this code here is now being built. And so my app should use my mocked services now. And you can see it indeed worked as expected. And so this is especially useful because by adding this app configuration, now we are able to toggle the app between live and mock quite easily. And so it can be even more useful in just testing our app while we develop, but also testing, running our testing target with mock data that will always be the same. For instance, I'm thinking especially about UI testing here. And one last thing I wanted to say, but I've forgotten what I wanted to say already. Maybe like it will come back to me at some point. No, it doesn't seem to come back to me. So let's keep moving on. And so next part of the program is to see how we can write tests for our app. So I'm going to create a testing target first. So to do it, let me just show you where I clicked. I went a bit fast. So I went inside my project, selected my project, click on the little plus. It's out of the screen. That's why you couldn't see it. Let me just bring it. Yes, I'm clicking on this plus button here. So I create a unit testing bundle. So it's going to be called app architecture test, and it's going to test my target app architecture, which is the name of the app I am building in this live. So I have my new code right here. So I'm going to get rid of this because I want to start from scratch. So first I'm going to import my app, which is called app architecture, the name of the app. I'm going to add an add testable import to it. And the reason is that when I do add testable, basically everything that was internal becomes public. So this way I don't have to like explicitly mark everything public to be able to use it inside my test. And so I'm going to start to write some tests. So first I'm going to write tests, for instance, for my dependency um, injection. So what could those tests look like? Well, for instance, what I can do is that I can attempt to instantiate my movies view controller. So I do it through the view controller provider, and it's a static property. It's a computed static property movies view controller. And I want to assert several things over it. First, I want to assert, but it's not nil because the movies view controller actually, could it be nil? Could it be nil? It couldn't. No, it couldn't be nil. So first, the simple fact that I can create it and it hasn't crashed, it means that here this forecast has been working. Then I could, for instance, forget to set the view model, and it could be a big issue. So I want to make sure, I want to assert that the view model is not nil. So I'm going to do it like this. So you can see in my code, I have on purpose forgotten to set the view model. And so hopefully the test should fail and it should catch this error. So actually it caught the error even before, because in view did load, the app was crashing, but the purpose is that having this test managed to catch my error. So I'm going to just fix my code, and so now of course the test should run properly. Okay, and of course I could do the same thing. So for the movie details view controller, so this one, if you remember, in order to instantiate it, I need a movie. So how do I get a movie? I can actually go inside my movie service and take one of my hard-coded movies and use it as test data. So movie like this, I pass in the movie, and once again, I want to assert that the movie's view controller, so like this, is not nil. What could I want to also assert? Yeah, I want to use also the correct view controller. Let's say maybe I want to assert that I have instantiated the correct service depending on the app configuration. So how could I do it? I could, for instance, switch over my app configuration. So like this. I would like the compiler to help me and generate the code for me, because remember, I'm lazy and I want to assert that when I am in the case live, I want to assert that so the view model as a service that is of type movies service. And when I am in a mock, I want to assert that it is a type mock movies service. This way, if I switch the queue by mistake, I will be able to catch it inside my test also. Okay, so that was pretty basic, but I just wanted to show you that a test is a good way to make sure that our dependency injection is working as expected. But we can write even more interesting tests, and we can write tests that will make sure that our view model behave correctly. And by behaving correctly, I want to say that they actually call the correct method to get their data. So here I would like to test that inside movies view model, when I call fetch data on an instance of movies view model, inside it calls the method get movies once and only once. This way, if I forget to call the method, it would catch it. If I call it several times by mistake, it would also catch it. And why does this test make sense? Is because if by mistake I'd forgotten to call service.getMovies, actually my app would still build and I wouldn't find the error until I had tested to like display the screen and seen that nothing was appearing. So how could I implement this test? What I'm gonna do is that I'm going to go inside my mock services and I'm going to add some feature to it. But before I do, let me see. I see there was a question in the chat. So how would you make the app configuration be available for more or even all services within the app? Great question. It goes something I forgot to say, and it's that when you want to do dependency injection at a big scale, here the way I've done it is the core IID, but I've done everything manually. You could be using frameworks like, for instance, Swinject, that will allow you to basically, how should I say it, like cut your injection code in several parts, and this way you would be able to properly encapsulate the app configuration and have it be like consumed by only the part that need it. Here, using a global variable, I would say it's not that bad because it's not really a global variable, it's a global constant, so you cannot change it. But doing something that is a bit more scoped would indeed be a better approach. And as I was saying, you can take a look at frameworks like Swinject, for instance. That is one of the most famous one. So moving back to the mock movie service, how do I make it so that I can know exactly how many times the method was called? It's actually pretty simple. I just need to introduce a property that will be a counter for the number of calls, and so I call it get movies counter. I give it an initial value of 0, and first thing inside the method get movies, I'm going to increment this counter. And now let's see how I can use it. So I'm going to go back in my test. I'm going to write a new test. So let me get rid of the console so we have a little bit more space. So my test will be test movies view model. So like this. So first I need to create my mock service. So it will be movies, mock movies service. Mock movie service like this. Then I create my, then I actually create my view model. So like this. So movies view model, and I pass in the mock service. Okay. Then I'm going on it to call the method fetch data. Then I could write, of course, a classic test. So for instance, I would want to test that, so on my view model, the number of movies is equal to 3 because my mock service returns 3 movies. So the fact that there is 3 movies, it gives me confidence that the method was called and the correct return value was provided. But I can also test how many times actually the method get movies was called, and I can do it because on my mock service, I have an access to the property get movies counter. And so I can just do xct assert equal, and I want to assert that this counter is equal to 1. And by doing so, I'm testing that when I call fetch data, under the hood, it does call the method get movies of the service, and it calls it exactly once. This way, if I forgot to call it, it will catch the error, and if I called it more than once by mistake, it will also catch the error. And let me run the code to make sure about it. And as you can see, indeed, it has worked as expected. And let's just introduce a mistake to make sure it indeed does the job. So let's say, I don't know, like I did a bad copy paste and I'm calling the method twice. Actually, it looks stupid when I do it on purpose, but you know, it is the kind of thing that happens like easier than we would like it to, but that's life. So let's try to see. And as you can see, this time the test failed, and it says xc assert equal failed, q is not equal to 1 because the method was called twice and my test has successfully caught it. Okay, so let me just fix the code before I forget. So here I want to remove this, and I want to go even a little bit further because I want to test also the second view model. So I want to test my movie details view model. So like this. So first let me do all of the boilerplate. So I want to have my mock service, which is a mock movie detail service. I want to have a view model, which is going to be a movie detail view model. So it needs a movie and a service. Fortunately, I know that the movie, I can get one because I have one just above. Actually, what I'm gonna do is that I'm going to take this and I'm going to make it a static let like that. This way, both instances will be able to use it. Just need to fix a few call size, I think. Or actually, yeah. Okay, seems to be working well. Same thing here. And of course, I inject the mock service. Okay, so we know the drill. On view model, I call fetch data. So then using no, there is not a counter yet. So I need to implement the counter first, but we know how to do it. So let's implement it. So it's going to be get credits call counter. So we know drill. It begins at 0, and then first thing inside the method, we increment it. Of course, writing this code by hand is a bit tedious, but there are frameworks, more like tools, code generation tools, like for instance, Sorcery as a template to be able to automatically generate for you mocks with all of these nice extra variables. So I have my call counter for the first method. I'm gonna do the same thing for the second one. So get poster call counter, it's equal to 0, and inside the method, I increment it. Okay. So in my test, I can test that when I call fetch data, then I can assert that so mock service get poster call counter is equal to 1, and assert mock service get credits call counter is also equal to 1. Perfect. But as you can see, these two methods, they also have arguments. And maybe I would like to try, I would like to test that they were called with the correct argument, so with the movie that was given when I created the view model. And I can also do it because I can just add a new local variable. I will call it get poster movie argument, and it will be of type movie implicitly unwrapped. And what I will do, once again, when the method gets called, I'm going to store inside this variable, so it's rather a property, I'm going to store the value of the argument. This way, inside my test, ooh, I made a bad mistake here. lucky thing I caught it. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing just below. So get credits movie argument. So movie implicitly unwrapped, and just like before, first thing I do inside the method, I want to set the value. And as you can see, the mistake I made where I used the wrong variable, the compiler couldn't catch it. And for me, the fact that this mistake is super easy to make in a code that is a lot of boilerplate is a great argument to the fact that you shouldn't be writing this code by hand, but you should rather use a tool like Sorcery. Because you should never trust a human to do the job of a robot. You should use a robot in the first place. And so what's great is that now, not only can I test the call counters, but I can also assert that mock service get poster movie argument is indeed the argument that I have passed in. So when I created my view model, which is the movie I have stored right here as a local constant, I'm going to do the same thing for here. So for the second method, which is get credits movie argument. And you can see that with this approach, what's pretty nice is that we are able to write tests that are not only black box tests, meaning that, I mean, in a way, is it a black? It's still a black box test. It's still a black box test in a way because we don't touch directly the private members of the view model. But since we have control over its dependencies and we've implemented mock version for it, we are able to take a look at how the view model worked, used its dependencies, and we can make sure that you use them in the right way. And actually, this approach is something that is like fairly common in testing when you have a layered architecture and you want to test the layer of level n. The way you do it is by writing something that simulates the layer below it, so the layer on which it depends, in a way where you can monitor the way the layer under test is interacting with the layer below it. And here, that's what we've been able to do. And of course, we could go even something more complex, like introduce a new variable for each new argument. We could do the same thing when the argument is of type completion alert to make sure it was indeed called. That's something that would be actually like useful because in that kind of method, it's also very, very, very useful, very, very easy, sorry, to forget to call the completion handler. So how could we actually do it to make sure the completion handler was called? Because I know that that Sorcery has a way to do it. I don't remember how it does. Let's see if I can remember it. But we will need to wrap something, because even if I create a variable like completion handler called, I mean, I would need to use it, and I could still forget that one line. So I think it would actually require a little bit extra code, but it might be also a topic like for a future live. How do you test to make sure the completion handler has indeed been called? It would make a good topic for a future live or a future video. And I see we're perfectly good on time, because we can move on to the last part, which is the pattern coordinator. But first, it's time for a little bit of water once again. Okay, so last part of this live, the coordinator pattern. Before we implement it, let's just discuss of why I think it makes sense to use the coordinator pattern. Basically, what is the problem that this pattern is going to help us solve? So let's get back to the code of my movies view controller. Actually, my movies view controller will be the only one that needs to use a coordinator, because it's the only one that is implemented a navigation. That navigation is implemented here. So in the conformance to UI table view delegate, as you can see, when the user taps on a cell of the list of movies, so let me show you. So when I tap on this cell, the view controller is responsible for, of course, handling the user event. Then it needs to know which movie was associated with the cell that the user interacted with. But then it also needs to instantiate the following view controller and also push it onto the navigation stack. And I would argue that this responsibility should actually not be inside the view controller, because doing so, well, not only it adds extra responsibility and it makes the view controller more complex, but let's say that for some reason, we have some additional navigation logic on which view controller to show. Like, for instance, I don't know, like in some cases, for some kind of movies, we want to display an ad, for instance, because like the movie is very popular and the people who make the movie have paid us to show an ad for it. Like, I don't know, that in a real app that could be possible. I would need to add this extra navigation logic here in my view controller, and so it would become even more complex. And the fact that also the view controller knows how to implement the navigation is not that great, because let's imagine this time our app implements push notification. So I get a push notification to say, hey, this movie will be released tomorrow. Do you want to learn more about it? Of course, I want that when my user taps on the notification, it opens the app and it immediately pushes the details of the movie that was mentioned in notification. Like, it only makes sense to do it that way. And so I would need to do what we call a programmatic navigation, meaning that I would like my app to navigate to a screen in response to an event that was not necessarily triggered by the user, like clicking on something on a view controller. And same thing, doing so would make it hard, because it's the view controller, the instance of a view controller, that knows how to navigate to the particular details of a movie. So for these two reasons, I want to take that code and I want to extract it into an object that will be responsible for handling the navigation. So just like the view model was responsible for handling the business logic, the coordinator will be responsible for handling the navigation. So let's start and create our coordinator. So first I'm going to create a new file. So I call it coordinator. And if you look on the internet for the coordinator pattern, you will often see it being described as this protocol. So the coordinator pattern, to give you some background on it, so it's something that came from the iOS community. It was designed by Soroush Kanlu, who is a famous iOS developer. He has a great blog and he's given great talks. I can only recommend you take a look at them. And so he proposed this coordinator pattern, and this is what a coordinator would look like. It's a protocol, so everything that is a coordinator needs to satisfy these requirements. So first, you need to have an array of child coordinators. So actually, even though it's the first part, I'm not going to use it in this live is because it's useful for more complex cases. For instance, let's imagine like here my app is using a navigation stack, but if my app was using a tab bar, it would make sense to have a coordinator for the tab bar and then one coordinator for each of the tabs. And so we would need to store these coordinators somewhere in order for them, well, not to be released from memory. And so they would be stored inside this array and they would be owned by their parent coordinator. And we're going to see that the top coordinator is going to be owned by the scene delegate. So we have this array of child coordinators. Then in the context of an app that relies on navigation controller to do its navigation, I'm also going to have a reference to the navigation controller of the app. So like this. And finally, there is a method called start coordinator, and it's going to hook up the navigation logic of the coordinator. And of course, then I will implement in my class that will implement coordinator, I will implement methods for my own needs in terms of navigation. But first, let's implement our coordinator. So here I will call it main coordinator, even though it will be the only one. It's going to implement the coordinator pattern. So it needs to have an array of child coordinators, and I will initialize it with the empty array. It also needs to have a navigation controller, and I'm going to instantiate it right away. And it needs to have the method start coordinator. So where do I get the code for this start coordinator? I'm going to get it from where it was already written. So in the scene delegate, you see this code right here, I'm going to cut it and paste it inside my method start coordinator. Then, so I'm just going to display it bigger. I'm going, of course, to adapt the code to make it work in the context of the coordinator. So creating the movies view controller, I still need to do it. I no longer need to create the navigation controller because it was already created as part of the init of my main coordinator. The configuration of setting prefers large title to true, I can keep it here. I could have also like put it in a closure that would have configured the navigation controller, but since this will be called when I need to set up navigation, it also makes sense to have it here. And finally, I will need to set movies VC as the root view controller of my navigation controller. And for this, I'm going to do push view controller. I push the movies view controller, animated to false, because this is what happens when the app starts. So I don't want to show a navigation because it's going to be the initial view of my app. I've implemented this first draft of my main coordinator. Now I need to use it. And so, as I was saying, at some point, it's going to be used in the scene delegate, and the scene delegate will own the main coordinator. So it's going to own it just like it owns the UI window. So like this, main coordinator, it's optional. I'm going to create the main coordinator. So inside scene will connect to session. So I'm going to create it. Perfect. I'm going to set its navigation controller. So I'm going to set the navigation controller of the main coordinator as the root view controller. And finally, I need to do one last thing that is very easy to forget, but fortunately, you notice it quite fast, is that I need to hook up my navigation, and I do it by calling start coordinator on my main coordinator. Okay, and here I just need to do I need to do an optional chaining. Okay, my app builds, let's run it, and normally the app should still behave like it was behaving. Okay, I'm going to switch back to the live version because this way navigation, we will be sure that it will work even better if it displays the correct data. Okay, so the navigator is, the coordinator is ready. Now it's time to actually use it to extract code, to extract some more code inside it. So if you remember, I want to extract this code right here. So let's display side to side my movies view controller and also my coordinator like this. So in my coordinator, I'm going to implement a new method, which will be display details of movie like this. So it will take a movie as an argument. And what it's going to do is actually implement these two lines right here. So I'm just going to cut them and paste them here. So I still instantiate the details view controller given the movie, and I call push view controller. Just need to remove the optional chaining here because now navigation controller is no longer optional when I'm in the context of my coordinator. So my method has been implemented. I just need to find a way to call it right here. How do I call it? My view controller actually needs to know the coordinator. How am I going to implement this? I'm going to add a weak reference in my view controller to the coordinator. So it's going to look like this. How will this value be set? It's going to be very simple. It will be set actually by the coordinator just after it created the view controller. It makes sense for it to work that way because given the fact that the coordinator is responsible for creating the view controller, it can also make sure that it sets itself as the coordinator. So like this. And now that I have my weak reference, I can just go back to my movies view controller, take the weak reference on the coordinator. I call the method display details of movie. And now, if I haven't forgotten anything, they are built successfully, which is always a good thing. And now when I click, it's indeed going to navigate. But as you can see, the responsibility for navigating to this details view controller is no longer part of my movie view controller. It's now part of my coordinator. And what's really great is that first, it made my movies view controller more focused because now we can finally say movies view controller only responsibility is to manage the UI, so displaying the data and reacting to user events. Everything else is the job of either the view model or the coordinator. But also, let's imagine that we need to react to a notification happening. What we would do is that either in the scene delegate or in the app delegate, we would get the event through a method being called. We would parse the payload of the notification to get, for instance, the ID of the movie. And then on the coordinator, we would call a method like display details of movie, given that time the ID of a movie and not the movie itself, but we would manage. And by doing this, we would be able to trigger a programmatic navigation to a given view controller, something that is often also called a deep linking, so to implement deep linking inside the app. And actually, I have shown you everything I wanted to show you. So before I move to the demo of how it looks like if I set up the project on Bitrise, if you have any question about what I've shown you, feel free to ask them. Big reminder, I forgot to say it at the beginning of the live, but in the description, you have the link to a GitHub repo. In this repo, you will find the code I used for this live. So the way it works is that, of course, it's explained in the README, but there are two branches. The first branch is called before. It shows the code as it was when we started. And then you've got a branch called after, and it shows the code in the state it is now. There might be some minor difference, but all the major steps are here, and you have all the commits to see at each etap, at each step, rather, everything we've implemented. So the extensions, the result type, the view model, the implementation, the mocks, the test, and the coordinator. You can replay it, and you can take the time to experiment with it. That being said, a little bit of water once more. And let's move on to the demo part of this live. So I'm going to switch to Bitrise. Fair warning, before I do, Xcode uses a dark theme. Bitrise website does not, so you can expect the luminosity of the live stream to increase by quite a lot. So if you're watching in the dark, you have been warned, and it is switching right now. Okay, let me also myself move to Safari. Perfect. You can see on my face that there is much more light now. Okay, so what's being displayed? Right now, I am on Bitrise website. I logged in with my account, which is a free account. So everything I'm going to do now, you can also do it just by creating an account on Bitrise. I'm going to set up the app we've worked on. So as I was saying, the code is on GitHub, so I'm going to use that code, and I'm going to configure it so that Bitrise is going to run my test, so the test we have implemented. So for this, I'm going to add a new app on Bitrise. So I've already configured Bitwise to be integrated with my GitHub profiles, which will be able to find my code much easily. So I'm going to set a private app because I don't want anyone to be able to see my builds. I think it's what you're going to want to implement most of the time. Of course, the exception being if you're working on an open source project, then having public URLs for your builds can be very useful. But here I'm going to go with private. Then I'm going to choose my repo. So you can see it has integrated with my GitHub account. So you can see my repos and also the repos of my organization, which I'm not going to show you, but you can also, if you're working for a company, get the repos that way. So here I'm choosing this repo, which is the code for this live about iOS app architecture. So I click on it. Then I'm going to let I'm going to let Bitwise get an SSH key from GitHub to be able to clone my repo. Then I'm going to say which branch should be used by Bitwise. So as I was saying, the name of the branch is after. It's the name of the branch with the code after the refactoring we've just made. So I click on next. And now, so Bitwise is going to fetch my project and is going to scan it and to propose me some default configuration. So let us let the scanner do its job, and you can see it successfully detected that it is an iOS project, that the project file is apparchitecture.xcodeproj, the scheme name is apparchitecture, so we need to select a distribution method. Here I'm just going to say development. So this is the build configuration. I'm just going to edit it because I'm using Xcode 13.3 for this live, and I want to make sure I use the same version so as not to have a weird crash, any kind of weird crash. What's nice is that we can see that Xcode 13.4 is already available on Bitwise, so it's one of the nice features of Bitwise that they make the new version of Xcode available quite fast. So I used Xcode 13.3, so I'm going to use that one because I don't want to take any chance. Then I have to choose between two kinds of machines, so standard and elite. Here, given that my project is quite small, I think the standard machine will be more than enough. Okay, so why does it have two iOS stacks? Did I make a mistake? There are two iOS stacks. All right, development. I think I might have made a mistake. I'm going to fix it. Okay, this should be better. Confirm. Okay, yeah. Okay, it's indeed the correct stack. So app icon, I'm not going to upload one, but of course, if you've got several apps, you want to upload the correct icon so that then you know which app is which. So I'm going to skip for now. And I'm also not going to register a webhook, but this is actually something that you want to do in general. And the webhook is going to make sure that, for instance, whenever you create a new pull request, it triggers a build on Bitwise. Here, since I only want to run one build to make sure that to show you like how it works, I'm not going to register the webhook. Okay, and they started the first build for me. Actually, I'm going to stop it because I want to configure my workflow first. So the workflow, it's basically the steps that Bitwise is going to run every time. Well, for instance, when you trigger the workflow, or if you restore the webhook, when you push something, when you create a pull request, for instance. And you can see, actually, I was about to add the Xcode test step, but it's actually already here. So that's actually perfect. And you can see what's going to happen. It's going to clone the repo and then test it. So let's go ahead and do it. So I'm just going to go back to my app. And I'm just going to actually start a build. Okay, so branch after. I'm going to use the primary workflow, so the one I was showing you. And we're going to see what happens. So first, it's scheduling the build, so it means like starting well, an actual machine and getting it ready. And then when it's ready, we are going to see, you can see the console, so the console output being displayed. I'm going to click on follow so we can see everything that's happening. So first, it's making sure the SSH key is working. It's doing a git clone of my repo. Then there is nothing to pull from the cache because, of course, it's the first time I'm launching this workflow. So it's now going to build my project. Actually, I think it might have already, did it already build the project? Here it's doing, okay, it's building the project here as part of running the test. So first it's building my project, and we can see the name of the files inside my project. Okay, then it's building my testing code. There was only one file inside that code. And now it should be running my test, and we should see the result of the test appearing. So since it needs like to start a simulator and run the code, it's normal that it's going to take a little bit more time. While it does, by the way, if you have any question regarding everything I've shown during this live, feel free to ask them in the chat. Okay, so the tests have been executed, and we can see that my tests were successful. Okay, I've lost. There it was, we can see. So let's deploy. Actually, I'm not going to deploy because I don't want to upload my app to the App Store. I just want to focus on this thing here, so we can see that the tests have executed correctly. So you can see my two tests: test movie details view model and test movies view model. So if I go back to my code, so it's the two tests right here. This test here was not run simply because I've written it during the live, but it's actually not on GitHub. That's why you don't see it. But you can see my two tests have been run, and we can see they've been successful. And of course, the big interest of this feature is that, for instance, for every pull request, you could make your test be executed. And this way, before merging a pull request, you would be confident that the level of the code is good because the tests have passed successfully with the changes that this pull request is going to introduce once it has been merged. Okay, let me go back to Safari. And actually, I think this is what I wanted to show you. So just remember, everything I've shown you, I did it with a Bitwise free account. So it's not a special account they gave me. When you create your account, you have a number of credits that you can use to run a good number of builds already. So if you've never used a CI CD tool, like I can only recommend that you give it a try. Like for instance, if you have some project on GitHub, even like a small project you created once to give it a try to some API, try to set it up on GitHub, see how it works, and basically if you've never used the CI/CD tool, knowing how to use it is a valuable skill, and having even a limited experience, but having at least tried one CI/CD tool, I think it can be useful. And then I think that you can get that small experience with a free account on Bitwise. So I think now we are getting at the end of the live. So what else do I have to say? So of course, big thank you to you for following this live. Also a big thank you to Bitwise, who sponsored this live this week in English, and also the other session last week in French. So a big thank you to them for supporting this kind of community created content to help teach and spread good practices around iOS. What else can I say? So you've got in the description a link to the code. The comments are open, and there will be a replay available right away. If you have any question that come to mind, please feel free to ask it in the comments, and I will do my best to try to answer it. And I think I just have now to say thank you for following this live. Thank you for watching, and see you next time, guys. Goodbye.